Welcome to the Savage Worlds GM podcast. I'm your host, Jared Savage Daddy Gunning. Tonight's episode brought to you by Roll20.net, the world's largest virtual tabletop. Check them out today at Roll20.net. I have a question for the show. Email it to savagedaddy@gmail.com. Follow us on Twitter and Facebook, SWGM Podcast. Subscribe to us on YouTube and visit the YouTube channel, SWGM Podcast. And finally, lastly but not leastly, check us out on iTunes. Savage Worlds GM Podcast. Nailed it! Tonight's topic, breaking the law. No, it's not just a great Judas Priest song from the 80s. It's also our topic for tonight. We are gibless. Right now, it's the dynamic duo. Some may say douche squared. I don't know. But we're gibless for the moment. If Jib does arrive, he will be popping in. If you're watching the live stream on YouTube, feel free to participate in the chat, ask questions, because we do read that throughout the show. So it's just me and Dave. Well, let's do the introductions formally, because there we go. I nailed the intro, screwed up the introduction. What can I say? So here to discuss it, Dave, the rules made with Scott. You killed my character.
You know, it's just me, Douche Baggins, and our faithful common host, Douche Nozzle.
Nice. So, breaking the law. What we want to talk about tonight is knowing when, how, and why to break rules in Savage Worlds. Ignore rules. Come up with your own rules in the style of Savage Worlds. So let's just we'll just roll into it. And where do you kind of want to start this conversation, Dave? Because I think
the most interesting aspect of it needs to be last, unfortunately, and it's the whole why. I think we need to cover the when and how before we get to the why, because while why is the most interesting aspect of it, you need to understand when and how before you start getting into why.
Okay, so let's start with when.
I think the easiest answer is to look at things like setting rules. You know, when you look at Joker's Wild, it specifically breaks the rules by adding in this condition that everybody gets a bending when a Joker comes up. What's it trying to achieve? It's trying to achieve making the game more exciting. So the win is break the rules to make things more exciting. You know, gritty damage does the same thing. Gritty damage breaks the rules to make the game more dramatic. It amps up that excitement level because you're at a much greater risk when you take damage suddenly. So again, the win, when it adds more excitement, when it adds more drama, when it adds that edge to your game, that's the when do you want to break the rules.
I would also say then too, also we're talking about when it fits tone as well, right? So for example, do I want Joker's Wild in the zombie apocalypse survival horror game? Absolutely not.
No, but you might want gritty damage. Again, where, that setting rule that ostensibly setting rules are the very thing in Savage Worlds that's carte blanche, break the rules however you want. That's what setting rules are.
Right. So let's take a common rule that I'll say most everybody ignores. Encumbrance and load limit. And it's a rule in the book, just like, here's what you do when you soak damage. Well, why do you ignore it? When do you ignore it?
I think we all ignore it for the same reason that we add Joker's Wild. We add excitement to the game. Freaking going to my character sheet and adding up all these little numbers to see if I happen to get a -1 to everything I'm doing is not fun. It doesn't add any drama. It doesn't add any fun to the game to sit here with a calculator and do long division to figure out if I earn or lose a -1 penalty to everything.
Right, and even your players who are not with it are going to find a workaround. For example, let's say we're talking about the zombie apocalypse. Everybody's got a backpack that's got water in it, guns, whatever. They're walking around with backpacks. Even if that thing is fully loaded and we get into a combat, I guarantee every player of that game is going, oh, my first action, I dropped my backpack. Oh, now I'm no longer encumbered. Yeah, exactly.
there was a guy I used to play D&D with, and he actually had taken the time to draw out what his character's tracks looked like because he was carrying a rack on his back, one of these extended backpacks that had hooks and tie-ons and everything. And it was out of some book. I want to say it was like a Volo's Guide or something. That it was this really obscure piece of gear you could get that was just basically a backpack that could hold everything. And he had like one of every type of weapon. So he had these tracks drawn out on a piece of paper he would show to people and say, this is the track my character leaves behind. And it was drag marks and spots where like the lance had bounced to the soil and stuff like that, you know? But I mean, I think ostensibly, though, that all makes perfect sense when I can reach up and go and drop all that weight and take action. Then why bother calculating all of that in the first place? Fantasy Grounds, Roll20, a lot of the VTTs, even now that you've got these self-filling PDF character sheets that you can download on your phone or your tablet that will do all that math for you and spit that number out for you. Great, but is it actually fun to sit down and add that up? If it is for your group, by all means, run encumbrance. If you're running a zombie apocalypse and it makes sense to the game to know how much people are carrying, and it's going to add something to the game, great. But if it doesn't add to the game, break the rule.
Right. It's the whole thing that there's just a certain suspension of disbelief. We're only capturing in the storytelling. We're only capturing the highlight moments. If we watch a TV show where the camera was on the characters while they slept, while they ate, while they took care of personal hygiene.
The last time that you had a player describe what their character's bowel movement first thing of the morning was like.
Right.
It's just not an interesting part of the role player of the game.
Yeah, it's the mundane. It's the mundane, and it really doesn't add to the story. If anything, the reason it's not there is because it detracts from the story. It's not important to know, what kind of shampoo and role play that out. What kind of shampoo or shaving accessories your character, who gives two shits. Pardon the pun, especially in context what we're talking about. But I think there are points though when it becomes dramatically appropriate to engage a rule that you have not been using.
And I think encumbrance is the example that we're using. When you stop and think about this for a second, are you really enforcing encumbrance? Say you're in the middle of a game and you got the character climbing a mountain. They've never done any climbing or anything. And suddenly you're going to say, well, you're at a -2 from all the stuff you're carrying. Did you really take the time to look up and do all the calculation in that moment? Or did you just simply, as a GM, give them a situational modifier for the fact that they're carrying half the mundane item list from the book in their bags?
Right, but then but see now, and so let's talk about this, because here's one of the things with Savage Worlds. You decide to ignore a rule because it doesn't work for you at your table or your game. That's great. I understand there's a cascading effect to making that decision, even on the most minute level. Let's say we're talking about, well, we don't give two shits about encumbrance. Really? Tell that to the character who spent experience points to buy Brawny. Oh, well, half the benefit of me having this edge is fuck all. It means nothing because we aren't using those rules.
You could say the same thing about the people who take fleet-footed in a theater of the mind game. Mm-hmm. The GM is constantly throwing out terms like plot-appropriate distance, but that fleet-footed character is supposed to go 2 additional inches all the time and have a bigger run die. That makes a difference to that character. They've paid for something with an advance that plot-appropriate distance doesn't really cover.
Right. Also, the classic example we've all heard before, especially from Shane Hensley or people who've been at his table, like, wait, why aren't you enforcing the drawing a weapon as an action? Because I took quick for a fucking reason. I could quick draw for a fucking reason, and I should not. If I knew you were going to run this rule, I wouldn't have spent points on that edge. So
you stop and think about a combat just with that one rule. If you ignore the drawing a weapon rule, the first round of combat results in something dying. Savage Worlds' death is quick already. You don't need to add anything to it. If your very first round of combat, no one is suffering the draw the weapon penalty, they are immediately attacking with no modifiers. There's going to be a dead mook at the end of the first round. Mm-hmm. If not, all of the mooks. I've seen entire combats last less than a round because everyone already had their weapons readied when the combat broke out. But reverse that. Now all the players have to spend a round drawing the weapon, or at the very minimum, they take a multi-action penalty of a -2 to everything they do to draw the weapon and use it in the same round. And then if you get to like two-handed weapons or those weapons that are unwieldy, they have to give you an agility check just to draw the weapon and use it in the same round if they don't have that edge. That edge has got a lot of punch because all of a sudden you're deadly in the first round of combat rather than having to wait a full round of combat. Now, a lot of people might say, but that just slows the game down. So throw that rule out, but be aware it has that cascade effect. Everything becomes more deadly when it can automatically draw an attack in the first round.
Well, I kind of hear that too, but really, how much does it slow the game down? Add a -2 penalty to all your next action, to all your actions. It doesn't really. I mean, I think you're gonna get a lot of this. There's gonna be a lot of retconning your table. I already had my sword out.
Yeah, you're gonna get a lot of people say they already had it out, and you're gonna get the debate of, well, weren't you the one carrying the torch and your shield? How did you also have your sword out?
Right. How do you fan the hammer when you're shooting two-fisted? You're making two shots. You're fanning the hammer on both? How the fuck does that work? In what universe? What, are you like hooking the gun on your index finger? Then what? How does that work? So, I mean, a lot of that comes down to, and I'll also, so let's paint a picture. Let's paint a picture with rules and compare a pirate setting. It's a simple boarding. That's it. Your pirates on the deck of a ship. Bam, the ship comes up, the enemy ship comes up, and you're being boarded. Okay, here's the rules that should apply by standard Savage Worlds. Drawing weapons is an action, should apply. Unstable platform should apply. If you're on a boat rocking this way into that way, you're not standing on solid ground, you're at a penalty to move or shoot or do anything that requires agility.
I would even go so far as to say, if it's just a plank that's been, thrown across from one rail to the other, that's difficult terrain. It's going to reduce your movement at the very minimum. It's going to cost double to walk across that plank than it would to walk across just solid, decking.
Right. Now, if I go, and hand wave all of that, am I doing a disservice to the players in the game if I do that? Or are we playing a more fuck it fast and loose? This is Pirates of the Caribbean. We don't care about strategy or tactics.
We've said before that when the game's not running right, it's because you're not using all the rules. And I think this is a strong part of where that comes in, is people make that choice, the when, because it makes the game fun. They make the decision, well, I'm just going to throw that rule out because it doesn't make the game fun. Or I'm going to throw this rule out because it doesn't make the game fun. And then they wonder why, hey, wait a minute, why is this happening? What, not to pick on him, but, Jamie had that blog post a while back about bennies and how, God, they keep dropping bennies until they get success. Stop giving them bennies. As soon as you start following the rules and you don't just hand wave and give bennies out for every little thing, then the players have a limited pool of bennies to work with. So there is this aspect of some of the rules that are there as a limit are there for a reason, and you have to be cognizant of the effect it's going to have on the game. And this is where we get into the how. if what you're trying to achieve is I want to be able to reward players for great roleplay moments, but you don't want to build this huge Benny economy that's so unwieldy it's not useful, then maybe a great roleplay is a +1 to their action. When they give you that amazing roleplay, they get a +1 on whatever action they're taking in that moment. Why? Because it keeps your Benny economy from swelling rather than adding, this insurmountable they never fail because they have 9 bennies sitting in front of them all the time. So there's an aspect of the how do you break the rule that gets the net accomplishment, and that's where I think we see everyone say Run It rules is written for 5 sessions, 10 sessions, 20 sessions, because it takes a while to get enough understanding of Savage Worlds and how interconnected those rules are to be able to effectively go, what's the rule I actually need to break to achieve what I'm trying to achieve?
What about ammo?
Yeah, I saw that question pop up in chat. I'll be honest, the people who are ignoring ammo are typically the same people who are playing no PowerPoints. And really, it should almost be a nested set of rules in some cases. Otherwise, it can be definitely something that makes the guy who is carrying around a gun or a bow feel like, hey, wait a minute, the mage never fucking runs out of spells, but every 9 shots, I have to stop and spend a round to reload. And after 3 of those, I just don't get to fight anymore? What the fuck?
Well, and there's also here's the interesting thing is you could individually count shots and ammo. That's part of the rules. There's also you could also adapt the rules for allies, for extras, whether they're heavy, medium, or low on ammo, because that's an actual mechanic and rule that's in the book. It's intended for allied extras, so we don't have to do the excess bookkeeping. But there's no reason you couldn't apply it to the game to get some level of.
Well, I think there's people who have sold physical little 6-shooter things you can sit on the table and turn every time your character takes a shot in Deadlands. And I think it was Jib who said take and hand them a box of toothpicks and paper clips, and the paper clips represent magazines and the toothpicks are bullets, and they take one out of the clip every time they fire. I think there's so many ways of tracking ammo, and there's also so many alternative methods. Somebody asked about it on G+, I don't know, a week or so ago, and I think they got 12 different, alternatives to counting ammo as, here's a way you could do it, or here's a way you can do it, and here's a way right from, this companion or that companion or this toolkit or this setting, because it is such a quasi part of the game where, yes, it affects some players, it doesn't affect all players, and sometimes it's important, sometimes it's not. In a zombie apocalypse, you're counting bullets because that's a resource that's not, amply available in, say, a Romero-esque Walking, or Night of the Living Dead, whereas in The Walking Dead, the TV show, or even what was that really popular one? Zombieland with Woody Harrelson. Bullets were everywhere. Look, I opened up a Hummer and I find a duffel bag filled with guns and ammo. You never see them counting their ammunition. So even within the zombie apocalypse, you had 2 different extremes of how much are you tracking ammo. We never see Rick turn to any of the other members in The Walking Dead and go, hey, does anyone have a 9mm I can use? Because it's really hard to find shells for the Colt Python.
Or, I got my watch wet and now it no longer works. Yeah, there is a certain suspension of disbelief that goes along depending on whatever setting you're running. If you're running a survival horror thing, it's not ammo. Ammo is an extension of the whole holy shit, resources are scarce, which is key to running that kind of the survival in the survival horror is holy crap. Nobody's got enough food, medicine, drinking water. we're all screwed, and resources become a very important part of that game.
But
even to that,
the survival aspect of it.
Yeah, I mean, but even to that degree, there's at the table running a zombie game, there's certain amounts of abstraction that you could just apply and go, hey, you know what? You have plenty of food till it's dramatically appropriate for you not to have plenty of food. Then GM goes, yeah, oh, you just checked your backpacks. Nobody's got any water. Or you're down to your last, you're down to your last 8 ounces of water.
Each one of you are down to that reserve bottle. You suddenly realize, hey, we haven't been paying attention to our water, and we've got enough to last a day, maybe 2.
Right. And now it becomes a story element. It becomes part of the story. Okay, well, I guess we got to go on a mission this time when we sit around the table to find water.
So, and here's what I know I saw you commented on the Google Plus community. Carlin Kendrick, who's in chat, asked about using time as this resource. And he got, 6 or 7 different answers. One person suggested the burn die from Rifts. I suggested using a stat like academics where the players are making checks every time they go up a level. I think Tim Smith suggested a different stat that was a little closer to like charisma. Carlin got several answers. All of those break the rules. There's no rule in Savage Worlds anywhere that deals with the aspect of time passing, but the how you achieve it is absolutely something where you have to look what impact is it going to have on the rest of the game. The version I gave him was this idea that it's going to add hindrances. If they fail, here's this chart, roll against the chart and see how bad this is for your character. The one you had suggested, it was an actual resource, because I believe it was part of the Benny economy, is the way you had phrased it.
Yeah.
Where as they spent those, they were spending their time resources to be able to get those re-rolls. And it put the onus on the player that, hey, maybe you don't want to spend your last penny just in case you need to turn that in to avoid shot in the head by a bounty hunter. So I think
let's stop a second real quick. Let's stop a second real quick and just clarify that for sake of discussion. So Carl is running a game inspired by In Time, a Justin Timberlake movie from like 2012, 2014. The idea being that everybody lives forever based on amount of time that they basically buy by working. It's replaced economy. His concept is the players are all criminals who are bounty hunters. And instead of getting paid a bounty or money, what they get paid in is time where they're not on the bounty hunter list while they're doing this mission. So how do you pull that off? There's a number of questions that arise out of that blog post or that post on the Savage Worlds G Plus community. I highly recommend you go read because there's a lot of great, well, what about this? What about that comes up? The suggestion I basically had was everybody has the wanted or the enemy hindrance. Starting with play, they get the habit major, but major is time. So then just use fate chips from Deadlands to represent days, weeks, or months, and let them spend that as a resource on how much time they have left to pull things off. And when they're out of time, you start raking streetwise rolls against fatigue because they're out of time. Now they're back up on the bounty hunter list. And that's one way to handle it. It's very, very abstracted and makes it more of a resource and a focal point plot thing in the game. Any one of those suggestions would work.
Well, the interesting aspect of what you did, though, is you repurposed the way Savage Worlds already works to do it. And I think that's the part of the how that you have to understand is you have to understand how does that rule you're wanting to break work. Then you have to understand how does the rest of Savage Worlds works, and is there something I can grab to use here? So, again, our encumbrance question, knowing that as a GM, you can add a situational modifier to any dice roll means I don't have to track encumbrance to then tell the guy who's carrying half the gear list from the book that he has a -2 to climb that rock facing. Just like, I don't have to know the weight of his armor to know that he suffers a penalty to his swimming roll when he falls off the pirate ship for every point of armor he has. That's just knowing the rules. I don't need to know his encumbrance level or even enforce encumbrance to enforce this other part of Savage Worlds or know this other mechanic in Savage Worlds that achieves what it is you're trying to achieve without needing that rule.
Right. And the great thing, too, is the situational modifiers in Savage Worlds, being what they are, where a -1 or a +1 is a huge advantage against a target number as simple as 4, with all the benefits and the way players can achieve it. Having that ability to apply situational modifiers becomes a sort of shorthand for a lot of the other rules, encumbrance, unstable platform, to where you don't necessarily have to incorporate those rules down to the detail level, but you can still incorporate them into the game and go, okay, you're going to try to do an Errol Flynn dive, chuck, move, swing this on a moving ship that's going, all right, I'm going to need a -1 against that agility roll.
But Jared, it's not like oh wait, there's that pouch of musket balls on one hip, and a bag of powder hanging to the other, and the brace of 6 pistols across your chest.
Right, and then the same token too. So the guy who's loaded down with like all these throwing daggers and everything else, I'm gonna give a +2 or a +1 notice roll against stealth because he's going clinkety clank when he's walking down a hall. He might as well be wearing a bell around his neck. I think one of the more and really important things to kind of get across when we're going to start talking about how, is don't reinvent the wheel. Take an Occam's razor approach to kind of incorporating this stuff. And by that, I mean, find something that is already serving that purpose, and you don't need to create the rule if it's already serving that purpose. Just start enforcing that rule. If something similar to that rule is going to get you where you want to be, do it in the least amount of steps, and it becomes about familiarity. So anybody who's ever taken the habit major hindrance, for example, knows what happens when you go 24 hours without getting your fix. Oh, I got to start making vigor rolls. Okay, what happens? Oh, well, if I don't make that vigor roll, I get a level of fatigue. What happens when you get past exhausted? Well, I'm incapacitated and in a coma. So if that kind of works in your game for something else, by all means, do it. You could also apply, you picked up the alien hindrance from Deadlands, or, oh no, now you have anemic. So you could, like, let's say, for example, the players, for example, oh crap, we're in a nuclear wasteland and there's tons of leftover radiation. Okay, so I could come up with this radiation chart. I can have you make a vigor roll. I come up with this random chart or card draw table for all the... Stop. Give me a vigor roll versus in the environment. It's a hazard like anything else, like cold or heat. You get enough of them, guess what? You now got anemic as a hindrance.
I have 2 great examples for this. So I'm going to pull a jib. Let me tell you a couple of stories.
All right, everybody, that's marker off your bingo card. We're going to tell a story.
And the first thing I want to say is these are stories of me failing. So even better for our devoted fans. There was a period of time, it's been about 4, maybe 4.5 years ago, where I was working on like an A-team adaptation for Savage Worlds. And I was trying to figure out, well, how do I achieve a character like Murdoch? And I was trying to create this convoluted hindrance where you would draw a card and the card face would determine what kind of a psychosis you had for that session. So it was this really random aspect of, and for this one, you think you're Mary Queen of Scots. And for this session, you drew the card and you drew, the Ace of Spades, and you think you're your own nemesis or whatever. And I presented it in a G+ post, and it sat there for about 4 hours. And then Clint goes, "Isn't this just the habit minor hindrance where they get a -1 to charisma because they do some weird shit?"
Or quirk.
Yeah,
if you
I
don't
mean,
want to have a mechanical hindrance.
the character just does odd things, but he took it to that next level of, and here's the mechanical punishment. They have a -1 to charisma because in one session they're screaming they want a trash bag, and the next session they're walking around with extra medals pinned to their chest, and maybe they get a stolen valor, challenge or whatever. However, that character was going to run up against their mental anguish, he just distilled it down almost instantly with the minor version of a hindrance from the rule book. And I had literally spent like a week developing this long chart and what every card was. And I felt about 2 inches tall because I realized his was Savage Worlds, and what I was doing was still rooted in other game systems where you're going to have charts and big, massive mechanics and lots of splat books you have to buy for every little thing. So that's story number 1. This is a failure of mine to realize that there's already a rule that does what I'm trying to do. So I'm trying to break the rules. Instead, I just needed to, there's this other rule that already does that. So the next time I did this was when ETU came out. Ed releases ETU, and I have a group of players who roll characters, and one of them is going to play a gay football player. Another's going to play a little Japanese girl. I've told several stories about her character. I had one who was going to be like a Taoist monk, and another one who was like a journalism. So I wanted to find a mechanic where the football player, I could have him do his football games at the table and be part of everything that's going on to highlight he's a football player for a Texas college. And so I built an entire like football game mechanic into Savage Worlds. And I had, shooting. It works for kicking accurate field goals. And, throwing was for passing. And I went through fighting was for ducking tackles. I did this massive whole thing. And then Jared goes, isn't it a dramatic task for the one character, since the other 3 characters are sitting there waiting for their turn to do something that's not football related? Well, fuck.
Yeah, and on both that exists on both sides of the fence. I like to tinker with rules too, and there's this, and Dave and I, we're friends outside. We talk about rules, mechanics, things back and forth, and I'll sit here and hone this thing early on, like a year or 2 years ago. I'll hone this whole thing and go, oh my god, this is this wonderful thing, Dave. What do you think of it? And we both have the seagull approach to review of each other's stuff, meaning that, we'll fly in, shit on it, and fly off. It's like, listen, if you
savage answer, or do you want me to just tell you where I can drive a truck through this?
if you want to fuck the players, just go ahead, fuck the players. You're in charge of you're the GM. You're in charge of the world. Just go ahead and announce. Oh no, a gang of marauders shows up. Don't hide behind a mechanic and come up with this complicated social mechanic. Screw all that. And it works. I mean, like, I'll give you a great example of a setting book. If you want to get an idea of how to twist common things that already exist in Savage Worlds to sort of fine tune them very quickly, I'll give you a great example of a published setting that does that incredibly well. Deadlands Noir. Deadlands Noir has taken basically the social conflict rule.
Jesus, yes. I know where you're going now.
And dressed it up for interrogation. It's built on that core. Here's 5 numbers, 5 successes. Here's the margin of victory at the end. What information you get. You can use persuasion, or you can start with persuasion or intimidation. You can go hard, or you can try to do this. You get to pick one. Their interrogation mechanic is a social conflict.
Yeah, if you read the social conflict from core and lay it side by side with interrogation, there's not a difference anywhere in the steps you take to go through the process. It is 100%. They just renamed it from social conflict to interrogation and changed a few of the words to dress it up in a detective noir gumshoe style.
The same thing with patter and legwork. They're essentially really shortened dramatic task is really what it breaks down to. They're shortened, very, very shortened, stymied dramatic tasks that pretty much take place off camera. I mean, when you break it down. The other thing I think Deadlands Noir does very well is it understands that if it's doing a 1940s, 1920s noir setting, there's going to be that archetype of the femme fatale, who's the seductive lounge singer, and that music is a very big important part of that setting for New Orleans, and they understand that. Instead of coming up with this complicated performance mechanic of, oh, well, what do you do when you sing, or how do you do when it's knowledge trapped as perform. It's a knowledge skill like anything else. As a matter of fact, you decide what linked attribute it uses instead of smarts. If it's vocals, maybe it's spirit instead of smarts. It's linked attribute, but it works like a knowledge skill. Done. Knowledge. We're done. And here's the reason you want to kind of try to do that as a GM. If you're trying to find something to fit into your game, or you're trying to develop a homebrew setting that's off the beaten path of Savage Worlds, you want to try something new. The thing to remember is the closer it clings to core, the more familiar it is to you and your players if you're experienced with Savage Worlds, and it doesn't bump you at the table. You don't have to stop and go, oh, wait, hold on. Wait a minute. Let me go reference my setting document. And it makes sense to everybody because it feels familiar and it feels like Savage Worlds. Oh, how does this work? Oh, it works just like social conflicts with a twist.
And owing to something that Clint says, it doesn't matter how many times you've said something before. Every time you say it, there's a chance that somebody new hears it. So I'm gonna say this because while I've said it before, somebody out there might not know this. One of the greatest quotes from Sean Patrick Fannin, in my opinion, is the one where he said, the second time through when he did Shaintar, he realized the more things he changed from Savage Worlds to make Shaintar different, the worse it felt like it got. So he cleaved closer with the second version than he did with the first. And I think he's even publicly said that if he was to redo it again, there would probably be some more fat he would trim to bring it closer in line with the way Savage Worlds works, because the closer you get to that, the closer to true or to home you get, the better it's going to run for Savages, because Savages are used to the rules that are in the book. If I give you a rule that says every time you take a wound, roll on the injury chart, and it has this additional effect from gritty damage, that's not a big separation from I've got a penalty for every wound I took. If I take that a next step and I take away the penalty for the wound and you only suffer whatever the injury is, but you're still tracking wounds to know when your character becomes incapacitated, it's still Savage Worlds. You still have 3 wounds. You still get incapacitated on the 4th wound. You still are rolling on the injury chart. We're not changing anything, but we've broken the rules because now you're not taking a -1 penalty per wound to your actions. You're instead taking that, -2 from lame or -2 from one arm or whatever that would be appropriate to the action you're taking and the injuries your character has suffered. There's a lot of things you can do within Savage Worlds, and another great example is the Realms of Cthulhu gritty damage. That absolutely 180 degrees changes the way combat feels in Savage Worlds. Mm-hmm. You want to watch players go through a butt pucker moment, announce that you're drawing for initiative in a game that uses the Realms of Cthulhu gritty damage, and you will watch all the eyes get a little wider, everyone sits up a little straighter, they all get a little more worried and start suffering from swamp ass because they suddenly know one failed attack by a friend can kill their character outright. Innocent bystander does enough damage to shake them, and they're making that incapacitation check to see if they go into shock. They're making that check to see if they're dead from a shaken result.
Yep. Well, and let's just, we're on the topic. We're talking about Realms of Cthulhu. Sean Preston's Reality Blurs. Salute. Ingenious adaptation of a setting to Savage Worlds. A lot of players, a lot of people tell you Savage Worlds can't do Cthulhu. It's too pulpy, it's too over the top, it's too swingy. You can't do Cthulhu in Savage Worlds. Go pick up Reality Blurs. I beg to fucking differ. Now, one of the great things that I think Sean did with that is the sanity mechanic. Now, before Realms of Cthulhu came out, there were sanity mechanics from Rippers, from the Horror's Companion. There were plenty of sanity mechanics out there. He could have just picked them up and went, here, use this. I think the genius of that setting is the idea that exposure to Cthulhu-esque monsters causes this psychosis as part of sanity is ingenious, because all he did was take, okay, you know what? We're going to call a new stat. Now you have sanity. Works just like toughness, except it's based on spirit, not on vigor. Works exactly like toughness. That's your sanity. That is your mental ability to withstand Cthulhu damage, mental damage from psychosis.
Cthulhu damage makes perfect sense.
Cthulhu damage. Once you take, and now all Cthulhu damages, instead of going, okay, well, Savage Worlds has this thing where creatures have a fear rating as part of the general rule. So seeing a zombie or seeing a werewolf has a -2 fear check built into it. Okay. So instead, we're Cthulhu damage, we're going to do 2d6 mental damage instead. So when you see them, okay, roll against mental damage. Oh, I rolled 20. What's your mental toughness? 5. Okay, now it works just like the wounds, except with wounds, you have mental disorders. And now you have mental disorders that are hindrances that simulate psychosis. Done. They can be healed naturally over time. And it works. The sanity wound idea works exactly the same way the physical damage wound works. And it is perfect for Call of Cthulhu because it takes something very familiar, it's easy to remember, and inserts it into that world where it's part of the focus. I will add this, and this is a version of gritty damage that we've used, I think, in some of the Savage Saturday nights. I know it's something that I've used in a couple of game settings for one-shots. I like the idea of gritty damage. The Realms of Cthulhu gritty damage is a little too, oh, fuck me, for one side in a game. The gritty damage from Savage Worlds, to me, takes up too much extra time at the table because I got to roll against an injury table. It's an added step I don't like. But I still want damage to be, physical violence damage to have a more gritty gut check moment. Simplest resolution of that is add the wound modifiers before you make a soak roll. Done. Because
you're making the soak roll to avoid those 3 wounds at a simple -3.
Yep. So it still gets to that point that you want, but it does it by changing one aspect of the rule. You can still soak, but you're going to apply your modifiers before you soak, which makes it harder to soak, which is what I'm going for at the end of the day anyway, in a more action zombie horror movie or a more gritty street level supers game maybe.
So we've given several examples of how to break the rules. When to throw a rule out, like the encumbrance stuff, or how to break the rules, using gritty damage instead of, the traditional damage. Let's talk about why. Because you touched on this early on, is the whole theme and feel that you're trying to achieve. Why is it that in Realms of Cthulhu, you have to break the rules on damage?
Because the setting, first of all, it's a horror setting. Secondly, you're not supposed to win in that setting. It's supposed to be about investigation, not about combat. That a Cthulhu setting, if you're honoring the Cthulhu mythos, is not about, okay, yeah, you're gonna be chased by cultists. Yeah, you're gonna run into a couple mooks here and there, but it's not supposed to be about combat. It's supposed to be about you investigating and uncovering mysteries, and then pulling back the veil of reality to go, oh fuck me, and run the other way.
So I think there's an aspect of this that, you know, I see a lot of the time, which is I didn't have fun, or my character didn't feel heroic, or these negative things that are said about the game that end up becoming the why we break the rules. And quite honestly, those are the things I personally think are the wrong motivator. I don't think the I didn't have fun is a reason to break the rule. I think the I didn't have fun is a better reason to go back and reread the rule. Try to figure out why it wasn't fun for you or your group when it is, for the most part, considered fun by most of the Savage community. And a great example of the most of the Savage community is take a look at the Shaken rule changes. We don't have Chris here, so I don't have to worry about him, slithering on.
Oh god damn it!
Shaken. But when that came down, it was the most desired rule change among a large segment of the group, because this whole Shaken cycle where you'd get Shaken, come out of Shaken, go right back into Shaken before your character could act, was something players disliked. Pinnacle heard that, and they made a change to the way the rule works, because a large portion of the community wasn't having fun with the way the rule was written. Mm-hmm. That is a sign of a company that's going to listen to that feedback. That's a company that wants their game to be fun to play. So when something negative happens at the gaming table, whether it's a bad dice roll causes a negative outcome, whether it's your character's not going to win in this particular scenario and they're going to suffer a loss, well, then that's up to you and the GM to find a way to make that loss interesting in the story. It's not time to go, well, I shouldn't have to roll against a dramatic task and have an auto failure if I fail a complication. That's not fun. That's not fair. Well, no. That's not fun is because your GM didn't then give you a fun narrative outcome that's the complication ended the dramatic task. Mm. And I think that's where we see the wrong motivator to change the rules. I think the why aspect of why do you break the rules in Savage Worlds is got to come down to I needed to do so for my game. I needed to break the encumbrance rule because, dear God, I did not want to go another session where my players had to do multiplication at the table to figure out, okay, I'm carrying 500 bullets for my machine gun, but every time I squeeze the trigger, that spends 3 because that's the rate of fire. And then I used full auto, which spends 3 times that, so that's not... oh, Jesus, how much ammo did I go through? Wait, how much did that weigh? What do I change my encumbrance to? Not fun. I had to make that change. That's where I think you have to have that moment to say, is the rule what's causing the problem, or is the rule not being applied appropriately, and because of that, there's a problem?
Right. I think you have to be very careful not to get a lot of exercise jumping to conclusions that you need to change a rule because it's not fun at the table. I think you need to be a little bit more retrospective and make sure you're running it right. And with that, I'm going to say, for example, light bulb moment for me is a Wiggyism. Anybody who has Google Foo and wants to hunt down Whispers from the Pit, you can find these newsletter PDFs from Wiggy, Wade Wiggy Williams Jr. The interpretation of a player's action being a trick versus being intended to cause damage was a game changer for me as a GM. When you say, and we've used example for in the spirit of we may have new listeners, I'm going to repeat it again. but very briefly. If if the character declares, okay, the orc has your buddy by the throat up against the wall in a cavern, and you being the acrobatic thief are going to go, okay, I'm going to run up the side of the wall, do a backflip, slice him over the eyebrow, so blood drips into his eyes, and he drops my buddy. That is not a multi-action because the intent is not to cause damage. The intent is to cause a shaken result. Therefore, it's an agility trick. One roll, done. So saying, oh, well, I don't like the way this multi-action penalty works in Savage Worlds, I'm going to change it. Go back and make sure you're running it right. Go back and make sure you've read it right. Let's give an example. And I'm going to have to go back and do a little apology eating crow post in the GM community here briefly. Because I applied in innocent bystander. I understand how it works at the table. I understand it in my own head. What I wrote down, completely opposite of what I understand and what I know. You will see this. Rolling a 1 on a shooting die, firing into melee, it hits a random stranger. Yes, only on a miss. So if you roll a 1 on the shooting die and the wild die, you got a 6, that doesn't apply. It has no effect. It's only when the grand total of your dice roll is not a 4 or higher. So you could roll a 1 on the shooting die and a 3 on the wild die. Innocent bystander doesn't apply. You succeeded. No, wait, a 4 on the wild die. You succeeded. Be careful. So that's the thing.
The first time we've quoted a rule wrong on this show. I'm just saying.
It happens. But yeah, you have to understand, well, okay, so does something bad happen on a 1? Well, you could say the gun jams if you like. You could kind of say, you know what, at my table in this game, it's appropriate to just kind of put a backlash rule on shooting dice. But here's the thing. Would I do it? No. Because the innocent bystander rule is vicious enough the way it is. It's bad enough the way it is to roll a 1 on the shooting die and miss and have it hit your friend for 2d6 damage and a bullet to the chest to where your buddy shouts out, "Stop helping me."
Joe M in chat actually says something interesting that I think he's pretty accurate here. He says, I think the best time to break a rule is if the rule gets in the way of being fast, furious, or fun. And quite honestly, I don't think he's wrong. I think that is probably one of those best time moments is when the rule break, the application of the rule breaks that fast, furious, fun moniker for the game. Mm-hmm. Encumbrance, it breaks the fast. Gritty damage can break the furious because now we're stopping combat to roll on this chart and then come back into combat. I don't get that press of the violence. So there absolutely can be those moments. Again, I would say anytime it's the fun, take a moment to step back and be introspective and go, well, is this not fun because I did it right and I don't like the outcome, which could also still be wrong? Or is it not fun because, we didn't apply the rule right and it just wasn't any fun at the table? Well, go back and reread the rule. And a great example of that, Jared and I both, about 5 years ago now, I think, came to the conclusion we were running ambushes completely wrong. We were running ambushes quite a bit closer to what D&D and other systems did with ambushes, where your character was just caught flat-footed and doesn't get to do anything, versus you're not dealt into the turn order, but you're considered to have been on hold. There's a large aspect of going back, rereading a rule more thoroughly, learning how that rule is actually supposed to be applied and putting it into place, and then trying it enough times to where you can make the judgment, does that rule actually have an impact that's not fun, the shake and change? Or does that rule have an impact that I just might not be happy with, but it's still fun for the table, you know, because losses and dramatic moments where the characters fail at doing something can be fun, but I think there's a lot more onus, and this speaks to a different conversation, but I think there's a lot more onus on both the players and the GM to put on the narrative hat whenever a failure comes up and really narrate those. It's something we were talking about in the green room briefly, is this idea that at the table, critical failures, critical successes, and every third success or so gets narratively described. A miss or a fail that's not a critical never gets described at your table. You have that GM who every time somebody hits goes, that's a hit or that's a miss. And then you move on. And then every third or fourth one, because they realize their job is to be entertaining, they give some grandiose, well, you spun the sword over your head and brought it down on his skull or whatever. And then you get the death blow, which gets the big spotlight turned on it and this grandiose explanation. Or you get the critical fail. You rolled snake eyes, and boy, is everybody like, oh, and waiting for the GM to tell you just how badly you fucked up. But you rolled a miss or a failure. Where's the narrative? What does that mean? You know, you stuck your lockpicks in and it doesn't click open. Okay, but where's the narrative? Is it rusted? Is it a different type of lock than you've ever seen? Is it magically protected? What caused the failure narratively? Those dice told you there was a failure. They didn't tell you what actually happened. That's on you and as a player and as a GM to make that fun, to make that creative. So don't break a rule simply because it led to a failure. Learn the rules so you know when it's appropriate to, we're playing Pirates and everybody took freaking what's the edge that lets you ignore unsteady platform? Steady hands. Everyone's going to take steady hands. Every single player character is going to have steady hands. Then remove the edge and just automatically grant it to all your players. Don't make them spend in advance to get something that's, necessary for every character that's going to be in the game. And right there, you've just broken the rules. You've taken an edge and made it standard, and maybe even created a hindrance where instead of steady hands, you have a player who takes unsteady hands, and they suffer the unsteady platform rules.
Right. So, yeah, you could easily say in a pirate game, if the player character is playing a pirate, they know their way around walking on a ship. They've got their sea legs. As a hindrance, landlubber. Yeah, you suffer the unsteady platform. Blah, blah, blah. And you can buy it off at, a couple ranks later. But a great tale. Here's the other thing, too. Critical failures in Savage Worlds, the only effect per the rule is you just don't get to roll. You just don't get to spend a penny to re-roll them. Does it necessarily say something horrible has to happen on double ones? Or is it just a carryover from, from other role-playing game systems with critical failure?
It depends on which version of the book you have.
Okay.
This is another one of those where the wording is different between the editions of Savage Worlds. And I just had this discussion on Discord a month or so back where someone was saying that you didn't apply cover bonuses in Melee, that, it's specifically nested under ranged modifiers. Well, in the original Savage Worlds Explorer Edition, it was nested and ranged. Mm-hmm. In the original Deluxe, it was nested and ranged. And someone asked it on the forums, so when Deluxe Explorers came out, it was broken out from ranged modifiers and put in its own section for just attack modifiers, because Clint was like, no, those absolutely apply to all attacks, not just ranged attacks.
Right. And it makes sense, right? Because if you're standing behind, let's say, a telephone pole and someone's trying to punch you, they had to maneuver and try to get to you. It makes perfect sense. Yeah. I'm gonna say this too. Like even Savage Worlds itself, between editions, streamlines its rules based on its own design philosophy. For example, We went from what, Explorers Edition to Deluxe Explorers Edition. Get rid of the guts skill. Why do we have we don't need the skill. It's a spirit check. Fear is a spirit check. We don't need guts.
But to answer your question about critical failure, there are versions of the rules that say that 2 1s results in something bad happening. There are versions that don't say that. But in all versions, the critical failure setting rule is specifically if you're using this setting rule on a critical failure, double 1s, you can't spend a penny to get
right. Right.
So the critical failure setting rule is the same in all of them, but as far as is there a critical failure result of double 1s having a necessarily slap in the face effect, in some editions of the book, that is actually a codified rule. In others, it's not. Right. I personally don't agree with it being codified. I think that should be left entirely on the interpreting dice rolls section that it goes to the GM later in the book, where it's up to the GM in that moment to come up with an appropriate narrative, rather than it's automatically always negative for the player characters if they roll double.
Right. I agree. And like, so for example, one of the things where, let's say, and this is one of the topics we were having in the green room before we went live. So to use one of Dave's examples, let's say that I've got the bolt power and it's Zeus's lightning, and I do this, and I create this, ball of electricity, and then I throw it at you. And I spend a round aiming, not doing anything. I spend a round aiming. I'm using the spell casting power, and I throw it, and I get a 3. Okay, that doesn't mean that the spell, that the fireball, I didn't create it. It doesn't mean it didn't go flying out. It just means it didn't hit the target. 3 is very close to a success. So why not have it go flying by your target's ear, singe all the eyebrow and facial hair and hair on this side of their face, and leave a head-sized watermelon hole in the wall directly behind them with burning, afterglow burning embers, and describing that happening as a fail instead of just, you missed, next, you missed, next, you missed, next. I agree. But guess what? That means more work for the GM.
Oh, absolutely. And I think that's another key to the why break the rules, because as a GM, you're willing to do that work. There's a really big aspect of gaming that is, I want to come home from work, I want to pop a beer, I want to sit down with my buddies and do something fun. I want to shut my brain off. If that's what you want to do, you damn well better just follow the rules, because it's a lot more work to break the rules. It's a lot more work to use a house rule than it is to use the rule that's right in the book. It's a lot more work to interpret what happens to the table if you've changed the way the mechanics are actually resolve any type of thing in the game.
All right. Well, I think we sufficiently have discussed the when, who, what, why, and how of breaking the law. So with that, unless we have anything else in the left in the live broadcast streaming chat room, any other comments or questions?
I haven't seen anything as far as questions. I've seen a lot of comments where people are just kind of chit-chatting back and forth as we make comments like pucker or seagull moment and stuff like that.
All right.
Yeah, Mel Primus just declared the horse is dead, yo.
Okay. So with the declaration of the equine passing, this is Jared Savage Daddy Gunning. Until next time, for Dave, the rules made with Scott, saying keep rolling and stay savage.